Good afternoon. This is May 14th. This is another new version of my in the use of video to promote and to advance my next round of study, which is all about the psychology of round and square. Let me repeat as much as I can. This is the new format. I have started to do the videos ever since February of this year. What I think is interesting that with the new technology in the digital era, we are repeating actually a very classical way of historical history about education, be that the Greek speakers, orators, Chinese, from the era of Confucius. The speakers speak and the scribers or the students, disciples, writing down, registering what the master speaks. And just in a very brief way, I'm trying to express to you there's a new element that coming into play in this form of education, learning really co-learning by what I'm about to present and show, and also by the presentation. Is there ever any margin of error or mistake? The audience, the students in the future share of seminars can highlight, pointing out what area is questionable or the area needs more clarification. So I'm very confident in the coming months, years, the kind of education we are sharing, like I do now in the form of speaking, will allow the audience to read this in your own language and to observe what you can have input. If you can add to it, terrific. We can share more. And if you have question mark about some area which could be puzzling or not, a lack of clarity, you can always be sharing with the speaker, with the orator or the presenter. And this is going to make things much easier in the up and coming months. I have involved in my last 45 years in the business involving gemstones and minerals, and more specifically, I'm very engaged with Brazil, where I grew up. So to make a short story, you will see the presentations, graphically, that my wife and I, Kathy, have spent 45 years in the business under the name of China West in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And before that, in 1974, we got married the same year. I had started my master's degree. And before that, I got my bachelor's in Spanish and psychology from the same university. But what is interesting, in 74, under the umbrella of educational psychology, and another layer underneath it, I have labeled it myself as a cross-cultural psychology. And you want to put another layer, talk about I like the title of counseling and guidance. And this is the serious evolution in the field of psychology, starting with this Sigmund Freud from Austria, German-speaking society, gradually evolving from Europe after the Jewish diaspora or Second World War, and then they have emigrated to the U.S., and the Freudian psychology started taking off in much of the East Coast, eventually to the West Coast, and here in the Midwest, becoming also involving from the series of the psychologists. I just mentioned a few names, how that come along from ever since Sigmund Freud. Gustavo Jung, very much into the cultural search. He went east, went to Asia, and had evolved a little bit differently the psychoanalysis Sigmund Freud, but amplified a lot more into the cultural dimension and cultural aspect of the psychology that I have observed. And many more coming to the East Coast. We just talk about in general the educational field. We all hear about Rollo May. We hear about Alfred Adler, and then in the more modern terms, you heard about Gestalt, Fritz Perls, and in between we have Eric Fromm. I, for one, have very much enjoyed the teaching or the counseling style of Carl Rogers, who eventually, he was here in Wisconsin for a while and then eventually moved to La Jolla, California. In that time, during this time of studying for undergraduate and graduate, and then I starting to engage with the more in-depth teaching of the transactional analysis by Eric Berne. It just so happened Eric Berne also was in California, Carmel, a beautiful location, La Jolla. My wife and I have visited. But what is interesting that from that aspect of the psychology of psychoanalysis in therapeutic psychology, psychiatry, what Eric Berne had adapted the three ego states of Sigmund Freud. I put it on the linear vertical, starting with the ID, with the biological human needs, and the second level is the ego I, and then the upper level is the superego. I'm using as a basic representing cultural, and that is the three circles, shapes, and forms that we draw out for the Freudian psychology. And then next to it is Eric Berne's format, transactional analysis. Basically, he opened the book like, I'm okay, you're okay. Is the top tier is the parent, and then the middle is the adult, almost parallel to the Freudian ego. And then the bottom of it is the child, with spontaneity, playful, the natural child, the adoptive child. And then the parents are the critical parents and also supportive parents. With all the diagrams of Eric Berne's, in that particular time, in 74, 75, I have just inspired to modify, to change some of the pre-existing put into sphere forms. I have developed the idea of the square and round. A little bit of that, maybe subconsciously at that time, that in my life growing up in the West, I left China in 62, well, the area of China, we talk Macau, the Portuguese colony, and the native tongue is Cantonese, which is also my mother's tongue. But I was born in 48 in Shanghai. Just use a very simple geographic zone. That is the valley of the Youngster River, where my father is from the town called Yuyao, which is Ningpo, which is upriver from Shanghai. My father's eventually gone to school in Sorbonne, Paris, came back to China, had business in Shanghai, and my mother is Cantonese, but also from Guangxi, a province next to west of Guangdong. Guangdong means east of Guang. Guang also means broad. The state of Guangdong before it's called Canton. And then Guangxi is also the broad area in the west part and the western part of the region. So it's in that geographic location. Okay, Guangdong, Guangxi, you can put all that into the Pearl River Delta. And today you're talking about Hong Kong, Macau, next to Macau, the Zhuhai, the free zone, and then north of Hong Kong, going slightly northeast, is Shenzhen, and then the capital city of Guangzhou is Guangdong. So, two river delta with many dialects and many of the cultural differences in tonal language and in speaking language. So early on, as a young child, the multiple of sound, be that of the speakers. My wet nurse was from Suzhou, and which is next to Hangzhou, and Hangzhou's on this side of the river. Is a beautiful city, and across the river, north side of the Yangtze River, there's the province of Suzhou. And in all the region, people have carried their accents, dialects, and whatnot. And as I'm speaking the cross-cultural psychology, going back and forth where I was born, where I was raised, and the regionals, the influences of the speaking, the tonal language, the speaking language, and then, well, from the age 5 until 14, in the 10 years, 52 and 62, most my life spent in Macau. And that's also where I got exposed to the English language, and also were baptized Roman Catholic by attending schools with the Italian order of the Salesians, the John Bosco, Giovanni Bosco from Turin. And I continue on with the Salesian school eventually when we got to Brazil from 62 and 67. With all that being said, in that particular time of my life, all this language exposure, along with English, and then the indoctrination of the Latin and Greek. Well, the Latin was basically mass service in the school system that I have become as an outer boy, service in the mass, and then the Gregorian chant was sung in the high masses. So, for this language point of view, as I'm talking all these little clusters, you can imagine these are the clusters. I call it all in the term the spheres, the cultural spheres, and how these spheres influence, impact my life, which had given me a very broad base of awareness language. And father had his French and English. There's also eventually linked to our fluency in Brazil. My father was very fluent in Portuguese, extremely fluent in French. He was a French literature major, and amongst his contemporary in the time of Shanghai in the 40s and the late 30s, he was considered one of the best French speaker and French translators. As a matter of fact, his roommate by the name of Foulet eventually became one of the best French translator in China. And that is all that exposure in my life is the clusters of cultures. I have named them the cultural sphere. Very prominently, I'm using this cultural sphere, which I developed very much on my own, is during my 74 to 76, getting my master's degree and writing up about the system I call, and I used the 3 C's. And the first C is the cultural sphere. In that particular time in point, the cultural spheres is of my students that I'm working with, many of them. And then they have, of course, they have their sub-spheres because we're talking about multicultural students, American students coming from Chicago, inner cities for the urban area into a rural setting of UW-Platteville. Eventually, I went to also university system in Milwaukee, which is far more urban. But this system of cultural spheres, I've added 2 other C. Again, this is the adaptation I use from the Freudian psychology evolutionary, moving to the point to use the transactional analysis. And we talk about all our communications in the use of the round shapes, eventually the square, and then the triangle. I call all that is communication dynamics. Every time, every moment we speak, we're already involving this kind of dynamics. On the other side, I have guided my students to learn about their own dynamics, which I call it the communication analytica. It's basically the communication, the system of analysis to let the students see to themselves interpersonally as well as intrapersonally, how they speak to themselves in round and round, square and round, triangle and round. And that is the system I have developed and become very practical, functional. It was the first time that I feel I have developed a metric system where I can do the evaluation along with my students. So that part of counseling, be that in any kind of a counseling advising, it can be therapeutic. If that communication had helped somebody and helped them clarify some of their thoughts, some of the ideas, some of the complications. If that have positive results, it's therapeutic. And you don't need to go, for me at that time, I do not have to go in much more in depth about all the other analysis. But however, my career for my work as a psychologist at the university campus at Platteville and UWM had bear the fruition of my testing of my new system with the results by the communication analytica. Because other than the analysis, the analytica in today's format will provide you also the numerical, the number, and to measure the result of the students and their performance. So it's both psychological and academic. Well, I take pride to do that. However, in spite of all the development, my position being Platteville and UWM, also positioning to be involving in a doctoral program at Madison, well, in the region of the academic situations at that time and point, Madison is the most viable, most possible institution that I will seek after my doctoral. Nevertheless, what came into life is a little bit of a unexpected in destiny. Striving to become a good teacher, a good counselor, with the results of my creation or invention, which from hypothesis to results is a very, very satisfying joyride. Nevertheless, along with this, the other part of me, the thriving to become independent financially. By my thinking, in that time in life, in academia, if I can teach at the college for 6 months in the summertime, I can use those spare time to develop other ventures, which I have shared experience with other faculties at the University of Wisconsin at Platteville. Some teachers have the consulting work, the other teachers have owned the restaurants and whatever. That part of the thriving to become independent was very much alive in me. So what happened in 1977, Kathy and myself, we have decided to take on the venture, which out of a very, very creative mind, thinking, daring to jump into the business, engage with the gemstones, which I have always interested in the color, and also the exposure with Brazil and the language. So by way I'm talking about the spheres, and then for the last 45 years, the major economic spheres is about the engagement of our company called China West with our presence globally, started with Brazil, US, Europe, Asia, and the major impact started in Hong Kong, Thailand, Sri Lanka, South Korea, eventually ended up to be Hong Kong. China is our base area of operation. So the bulk of the cultural sphere business, 77 until now, we are still in operation, but with the different kind of engagement, like we are now in videos, we can do Google Meet, we can do various kind of video conference and without that much of a travel. The bulk of the time is about China West and the articulation where we have moved from basically a mama and papa business with a small capital of $3,000. And by the first 10 years, we have already cultivated a business in a position with all the sound logistics and steps that have a $10 million based business between all the continents. That's the commercial side. But behind all that, this 45 years of the global engagement had enriched all my past portfolios from psychology to language. I handle my mother tongue from my mother's side, Cantonese, but I have a good comprehension of Shanghai, again, by hearing and speaking. fairly well, but the fluency is more on the Mandarin, which is the Putonghua, the general language in China. Plus, because of this linguistic exposures in Brazil, I also had developed the listening tongue understanding of the language from Sichuan. But then again, it comes a combination of the language I know. My mother spoke the native tongue in Guangxi, and then their Mandarin language they call Guanhua, which is the official language, is Mandarin, but bearing with the accent, the local pronunciations of Guangxi, and then very close to the linguistic hub of Sichuan. Plus, in 4 years in college, speaking of $3,000, well, I started my college with $800 coming up from Brazil, and that was that. And very modest, and involving 4 years in the Cantonese restaurant with the local people speaking Toisan, which by far one of the most popular migrant groups in the province of Cantón, Guangdong, and they have their dialect, very distinct dialect. And that's another way, exposure to the languages, speaking fluently or not, all these languages, the tonal and the sound have enriched my other, collectively, the 5 basic languages. Yes, Chinese, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. And the 3 Romance language was much more enriched by the guidance and the early orientation with the singing Gregorian chants and the language Latin with my Catholic schooling. As you all will be following in this particular video, I am introducing a figure, a cultural figure. Is taking a little bit more from the psychology of the Freudian psychology, or the 3 ego states: ID, id, ego, and superego. I have created this particular character, creating meaning, showing what is visual from the graphics, is this superhero in my life, the Monkey King. In this Freudian ego states, more so on the cultural side, which is talk about parental influence or the cultural influences, well, the Freudian psychology, speaking in the context of the realm of the cross-cultural, his entire dynamic and the personality, the names, from the Oedipus complex, Electra later on, adapting for the women, is all coming out from the Greek mythology or the Greek history. So why didn't Freud using his Judaic Hebrew origin? Well, that's another story. But in my case, when I cited my time leaving university, going back going into the business, had allowed me to travel back and forth to China. But to take a little bit from Sigmund Freud, a little bit from Gustav Jung, talk about the collective conscience, and maybe by saying so, by me showing this character, this figure is coming from Chinese book out of the Song Dynasty. This Monkey King is the collective whole of the Western images, the superheroes. Let me talk about Mighty Mouse. When I was in Macau, age 5 to age 14, it was already at the time, I call it the Chinese diaspora. And that will be eventually a very extensive subject matter, taking the Chinese diaspora, borrowing from the Jewish diaspora, which have its different phases starting back as early as the 1800s, before or after the Opium War. The Chinese movement and migrants from north to south through the dynasty of the Qing dynasty and its decline in the early Republic of China, with the early chaos of the warlords, the Chinese civil wars, the war with Japan, to the Chinese war, the Mao regime versus the Chiang Kai-shek or the communists, or the nationalists. In my preparation to do this theme of Chinese diaspora, also had given me the new vocabulary, new terminology called diasporia. As you can see, I'm speaking of the superhero, the superego of the Monkey King. And now, before I even get to the point about what we talk about, this alter ego or alter ego, by borrowing for the American youth kids image of the superheroes, and I'm going to name it, from Mighty Mouse, Superman, Batman and Robin, to now Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, to be politically correct or gender correct. Those figures are superpower figures and superhero figures had always exist in me in particular, and plus many Chinese, of this Monkey King. The novel came out of the Song Dynasty, has written about this story of this monkey who became a disciple of in the book called Journey to the West. Journey to the West is speaking of the monk in the Tang Dynasty who went on west by way of Tibet and got to India and brought back the Buddhistic scriptures, some 600 volumes. And in the meantime, in this 12 to 13 years time, he also acquired the language. He must have learned the languages Tibetan and in India. And just to take it back a little further, the Buddhistic study coming to the China 200 years before that about Zen. Many of you know in the West, Zen, how to link the cultural sphere, Zen to Shaolin. You will not understand Zen, the early part of the Buddhistic value that came into China 200 years before this Tang Dynasty monk. So the fable had described this character of the monkey who is a top disciple. He is the collective talent and skill of the Western heroes, going not just in the contemporary era. We can go back to the story of the Chaucer, the English stories, the mystery or mythology from any culture that. Like the Greeks, you have the demigod, you have the man and the deity and the interaction relations. And the Monkey King was, just by saying so, he was a king in his own realm. And in that Chinese character of the writing, the sky is two strokes horizontally. The first one is sky. The second one is the earth. In between is like a walking man. That's a character of man. But beneath the second ground, the earth level, that is the sub-level with the ghostlings. Other creatures, demonic, good or bad, they live in between these three levels: sky, earth, and I don't want to call it hell because it just connotes is suffering and punishment and all that. But nevertheless, the monkey is one of these characters that is so fabulous and so talented, and how he had acquired his skills and how he had become a talented martial art talented, magical, magicianal. Everything he had done have the absolute skill, talent. As a matter of fact, sometime earlier when I was trying to working out on the cross-cultural storytelling with the class of the business, in Milwaukee and also at Platteville, I've incorporated one segment when we're talking about Peter's principle, the hierarchy of incompetency, how we can become a certain level, become so good, then we oversaturate, we get bored with what we know, then we become less skillful because we become bored. This is a perfect story to tying in the story of this Monkey King, I'm sure that will be retold 1,000,000 times in different versions and languages within the Chinese community and beyond. And first of all, the author who wrote about this character, who built this character, the super monkey, the king of the heavens, he was born out of a rock. That's how the author had delinked the Chinese lineage, the traditions, the hierarchical, the Confucian values of the parent, child, country, nation, and the universe that almost fixated linear development. The monkey was born out of rocks, so we have no association. But at the very same time, he was given the name Swan. Actually, in Chinese, that means grandson. His name Swan also is the same last name as the founder of our republic, Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Swan meaning grandson. The contrast, and this is very dynamic. So the monkey swan is almost symbolizing all of us. We are all with the same grandsons to the Chinese culture. His second name is Wu, meaning awaken. Awaken, for many Chinese way to put it, is very much in the early part of the Buddhistic values brought in, which it becomes Zen in Chinese, actually called Chen. Zen is a Japanese sound of Chen, but Zen Buddhism or Zen values become very prominent, very identifiable in the Western society, just so happened in history. So by indicating here's a monkey belonging to us, the entire society of all the grandchildren, and the awakened monkey, meaning he's enlightened. He's already surpassing in the hierarchy of man. He become almost saintly. Okay, he's to be tempted because he had all the skill, weapons, martial arts, magical talents, which I will describe a little bit later how that had happened. And then his first name, by putting that first name, is Sun Wu Kong. Kong, you will see from the graphics, means empty. And that directly relating to the Zen side of the monkey, which I have named the Zen monkey. From that Kong meaning, he has zero human desires, lust, hunger, all the rest. And the human entities of our earthling attachments, gluttony, greed, power, lust, will show up more in the second disciple in the story of Journey to the West. There were 4 disciples following the monk, and the second disciple have the face of the pig. They call him Piggy 8 and many names, translating very interestingly. But the monkey, basically, I call him a Zen monkey, is already, by the time he got to as a servant, disciple to the Buddhistic transcript searching monk, he's already king of all heavens. He defeated all the kingdom, all the martial arts experts, generals, and whatnot in heaven, until he had shown his arrogance, insulting the Jade Emperor at the last minute. And in the metaphor, and even I will show in this part, a part of the scatological, a little bit crummy in the linguistic, how we talk about this monkey, how I perceive this monkey, is my itra persona, or the altera ego, or the alter ego. He beat everybody in heaven. He even defined the heavenly God. In the whole storytelling, there were deity from the Buddhistic scripture, there were deity from the Taoist, and all that. And in metaphor, all of a sudden the almighty Buddha, Yu Lai, had enlarged himself in the size of a mountain. He said, okay, you naughty monkey, if you are so talented, I dare you to come up to my palm. So in metaphor, he opened his palm. One of the many great talents of the monkey, I will tell it again, how he acquired his magical skills and 72 changes. And he is able to do a somersault that goes, I say it in Cantonese, Satman Ba Chin Lei. It's like 108,000 or 18,000 li, or the distance of measure. Meaning he can take a somersault from New York, Manhattan, into Shanghai or Beijing in seconds. Well, that's exactly how he had performed. He come up to the palm of the big Buddha. And now this is the scatological part that very few people have spoken on the general writing scriptures from Chinese to a foreign language. He's more than that. He got to the palm of the Buddha. On the front of the palm, he did a number 1. From the back of the palm, he actually released himself to do a number 2. And finally, at this time in point, his arrogance, and by insulting the most powerful being of the entire universe, the Buddha said, this is it. Flip him over his palm and created the mountain of 5 fingers. And the monkey supposed to be buried under that mountain for 500 years or more, or until that one time when this Buddhist scripture searching monk of the Tang dynasty heading out west and will be able to release him. And this is part of the magical story that I'm talking about in my fun playing lecture about the hierarchy of incompetency. He becomes so good and becomes so arrogant, eventually he had to be subdued by the powerful, the big Buddha or the Chinese deity, the top dog in the hierarchy. In the meantime, there's also a little evolutionary time from him being the king of all monkeys in his islands with fruits and trees and all the wonders and flower, very heavenly place where he was to become the king of all monkeys and also become the supreme being in all the earthlings creatures. He decided one day, he got bored. He said, I want something more than that. There's another level of his own hierarchy of incompetency, or he's just saturated by his power, by all that he has possession. He decided, I want to become a human being. And the story started with him. The story is tuck his tail, put on the human clothing, build a raft, and moving from his island to the continent, which is China. And that is how this monkey had become one of the most popular story, not just among all Chinese, more specifically among the youngsters. And this comes apart the adaptation. In Cantonese, we call a monkey Malau. And when I said Malau Jing, Jing means crystal, means spirit. For my 10 years living in Macau from 52 to 62, I lived in a household of 5, 6 women. My father had already left in 52 for Brazil. And in my time, living with my mother, plus my 3 other siblings, Peter's a year older than me, male, and my 2 sisters are 5, 6 years older than us. And also in the same household, we have 2 aunts. Number 5 and number 2. That's how we address them always too. Number 2 and number 5 and my mother's number 4 in between. And in that particular household, and those in that age, we're naughty kids, no question about it. In a comfortable sized home, in what they call it, the Youngster, the style of the Portuguese kind of a home. On the second floor, we have the open. It's like the third level is where you go up. It's a huge, good sized platform where the servants and maids hang out clothes, do their laundry, and do their washing and whatnot. So in that household, from the age 5 until age 14, those are the rambunctious years, the naughty years, playing years, but playing without the sets of rules. The way we think about playing, it actually end up to become making huge offenses to our neighbors. Imagine just one the most disgusting in the framework of the scatological events, that when we were playing with the feces, the poops of the cats in our upper area, and dropping it to the laundry, the buckets of the lower floor. There's only 2 floors. We're in the upper level, the lower level. They were the landlord, actually. Then we're dropping the chicken feces into their buckets and buckets of soaking water with clothing and whatnot. This is just one of them. When the event happens, when we were caught, they were looking for me and my brother plus our neighbor, the 3 of us, to hide ourselves from just the 2 floors, 4 families. We stay on the top of the house. We jumped into the baskets, the good sized baskets, in the bamboo baskets where the charcoal would deliver to our households for cooking and for other applications and boiling water and whatnot. When the search party looking for us, including our 2 aunts, my mother, and then the party complaining from the basement, 4 or 5 adults, when we coming out from those charcoal baskets, we were black. We're totally black with charcoal clothing and all. So these are just one of the events. In all this memory of the monkey, it's not about how dexterous and how skillful, how feisty, and how marvelous and how talented with all his skills, but very strongly reminding us of our activity, being naughty, mischievous, and also this had bring back relating not to Superman, the Batman, but almost directly to the Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer with Huck Finn and their adventures. And this is the character I'm just about to bring in to my future speaking engagements and my future presentations in speaking of the psychology round and square, which will be my main focus. Then I will come to those areas with a very specific academic in presenting the psychology for all with my 45 years, 50 years of education, and I bear this fruition where I think I have created, readapting my 3C system into a system of psychology in counseling for all. And that including then go to every group of culture with any kind of language. I have tested that in Chinese. I've done the same thing in Portuguese and in Spanish with my time and date in the past years, especially 2008. When I turned 60, I went back asking for the retreat in the jungle north of the Amazon, Manaus, in the northernmost region of Brazil, bordering Venezuela, Colombia, and also 70 kilometers south of the equator. And the town is called São Gabriel de Cachoeira. and I will continue with this in the next segment. In this segment, I will talk about this one extra zone, which basically is my entire life living in this cross-cultural ambience that got me started into my own focus and attention to the cross-cultural psychology. As a matter of fact, even linguistically speaking, cross-cultural is very difficult to translate into my custom in speaking of Portuguese. And in this segment, let me just start it again, how the sounds, the intonation, the language exposed to me when I was a youngster and before I'm 5, raised by a wet nurse because my mother could not have enough milk for me, being that my brother's older than me. In the wartime, he was born in 47, I was 48. And so with their separations, I stayed back in China for the first 5 years. The language spoken to me is, again, let me repeat, Shanghai. In the outskirts of Shanghai is Pudong. Upriver north on the Youngster River is Suzhou, and then came Hangzhou, and next to our villages called Yuyao, next to Ningbo. At that age, the exposure of the sounds and whatnot, I trust and I believe has a lot to do to impact or allow me to register the sounds that give me the extra development later on in life and by handling the languages. The second segment of that is from 52 to 62. I was raised in the Portuguese colony of Macau. Again, a family of my 2 sisters, my 2 aunts, my mother, plus the maid servant. The house, only 2 male, was me and my brother. And then we had our ages that attending to school. My mother was a very diligent woman. For whatever reason, which will come up to me, that she followed the request by my paternal grandmother. She was then in Shanghai, asking my mother to separate, if she can, put the daughters and the sons into gender-separated schools. And that's one of the many reasons my mother have decided with great wisdom to move from Hong Kong to Macau. Number one, Macau is but for me, from my experience, a very enduring, very rich, and very beautiful place. Beautiful, if you want to say it that way, it's very spacious comparing to Hong Kong, the noise, the tram, the movement. For most of the Shanghai folks in that particular time and period, they were living called the North Point on the island of Hong Kong. That was the area where the many Suzhou folks and the people from Zhejiang, called the Suzhou. It's 2 provinces sharing much in commonality, languages and whatnot. And then eventually we moved to Macau. And because this 10 years being raised in Macau, and obviously is post-war. There's almost no other choice, option, and whatnot. We had the exposure or the parents wanting us to learn English. So Chinese is the main course, the English is a second language. And more specifically, my sisters were sent to another Italian order school called the Canossas. And while the boys were sent to the school of the Salesians, or Salesianos in Spanish and Portuguese and Italian. And it was formed by John Bosco, or Giovanni Bosco, from Torino, Turin, Italy. And I am forever grateful and feel indebted to my schooling and my early exposure by this particular Roman Catholic order of the Salesians. And we are all baptized also, very interestingly, by the Jesuits in Macau. As a matter of fact, we were baptized by 2 priests, both Jesuits, and both from the mission, the first mission of Matteo Ricci. For those who follow history a little bit, Matteo Ricci was one of the most brilliant, intuitive, intelligent Roman Catholic clergy priests, plus others in Beijing. But he was one of the very, very firm defending the culture of Chinese. Since I can remember in the Western people engaging China. We can talk about Pearl Buck, raised as a missions daughter. She wrote about Good Earth, Great Earth, and all that. But what I very much in favor of Matteo Ricci is based on my research, reading in both Portuguese and Spanish while I was in Brazil. He was very defiant once his fellow clergy, not in the Jesuit order, I believe the Dominicans, had written to Rome that Matteo Ricci was not doing enough evangelization. Instead, Matteo Ricci was very much engaged in the Qing courts in Beijing, and more specifically on the joint research and development. On the one side, he was cultivating his learning about Chinese. So on the other hand, he was also had formulating in his in the making of the maps. Okay, where if you will see the map coming out from Matteo Ricci by putting China in the center, maybe it's a compliment to China, but in this last 25 years, other than the fact that I am very much engaged to Brazil, not just a merchant, but in the gem hunting, gem exploring territory, finding new stones, how they have impact my economic well-being. And I will talk about the gem explorer. I changed since from the gem hunter, but in Portuguese it's the garimpeiro. We have a platform on Facebook called GGMBA, but now we're changing that to the gem explorer. Garimpo is the mine. Garimpeiro are the plural for the people who are looking for mines. But in history, in this last 45 years, other than my business, our business with the gemstones, I have been engaged with Gavin Menzies, the English gentleman who wrote the book 1492, and his team in China. His manager director today, the 1492 Foundation, Ian Hudson, who is also in English, speaks good Portuguese. And in our shared development and research and discovery, I have my spin-off and takeoff into the various areas, including my personal observation or my interest of the Chinese called San Hai Jing. San means mountain, Hai means sea, Jing is called scripture, And I have found something very interesting in different areas of Brazil because my travel to the entire Brazil, including what I'm just to speak of my stay in the town called São Gabriel do Cachoeira, and also I have gone west, gone into the Amazon, the Solimões, and then I have touched bases with the natives in the region called Rondônia, the province, and engaged with the natives called the Cintas Largas in the area called the Roosevelt Reservation. Roosevelt Reservation was created by Teddy Roosevelt. And the person who escorted Ted Roosevelt into the region was then a colonel by the name of colonel or captain called Rondon, R-O-N-D-O-N. And that's why the province, a state named after him called Rondônia. And that's in that area I met up with different tribes in Sakirabia, and also the reason I have gone into 2008 directly to the northern part of Brazil, to north of Manaus. Manaus is where the two river crossing, Rio Negro coming down from the north, from Venezuela, and Solimões coming down from the Peru, forming the joint area called Manaus. And that's where it's very interesting, the merging with two colors of the water. Rio Negro, meaning black, is because all the acidity from all the trees. So it's interesting enough that you can hardly find any mosquitoes per se because of the acidity of the water. And then Solimoens is coming with a lot of sedentary from the Andes and coming down the Solimoens. The color can be sandy, pinkish, white, and there's also maybe by my imagining of color, if the dolphins in a similar color coming to this joint area. The reason I went back I went to the town called San Gabriel de Cachoeira. Cachoeira means little waterfalls, cataratas. You can be the big waterfall, cataratas, and then you can have the the steps of water falling. Beautiful region. Is that when I first gone to Brazil, attending school of the Salesians, continue with the Salesians in the town called Lorena. Lorena is a town sitting exactly halfway between Rio de Janeiro on the ocean, northeast, and to the city of São Paulo, which is on a plateau. 250 kilometers right in the middle. The mission of the Salesians has set up their school. Today, my school is 134 years old, and now my school is no longer a Catholic boarding school, middle school. Today, it becomes a Unisal, University of the Salesians. We have several branches. But to quickly to go back to this region, I love the schooling. I love all that had happened in the 2.5 years, 3 years in Brazil. The improvement of my languages, other skills, sports. But in particular, in that particular school, there's only 2 ethnic Chinese. I shouldn't say 2 schools. It was my school, and next door attached to us is the Faculdade Salesiana. You can translate to Salesian University. Today they call it Unisal. But I met Song, S-O-N-G, the same writing as the Song Dynasty. In this particular segment of my presentation, will possible give some of the one of the historical markers of 2 Chinese and some of the very first time what we have created marking in the Chinese, overseas Chinese history in Brazil. So we met. We shared the commonality that we both were from Shanghai, and we both were raised in Hong Kong, me in Macau, in Cantonese. So we share Cantonese, we share some Shanghai, but we speak most of the time Portuguese. But we share the same schooling. And when I met with Song in 1965, I had the desire to join the mission of the Salesians. And in 1964, 2 of the Salesians missionaries were killed in the western part of Brazil, in the region called Mato Grosso. And Campo Grande, by the way, and that's where the very well-known native tribes called Chavantes, and as a matter of fact, highlighting the Salesian school and the missions, they become one of the greatest savior, they preserve the culture of the indigenous from many parts of Brazil, and in particular Campo Grande in Mato Grosso was a very good school, and I wanted to be part of the mission, not just because out of the curiosity of the wilderness in Brazil. 62 we got to Brazil, and Brasilia was just recently formed. Rio, still the old bourgeois of the former diplomatic city of Rio. My father took us many times. I have enjoyed Rio and the beaches and the beautiful city and all the bays in Rio. But in this particular time and point, my curiosity had already started with my Chinese, English, Portuguese, and the exposure of the Latin and Greek. I had a great deal of interest to learn the language and the exposure of the the duo language called Tupi Guarani, which is the major language spoken by the natives of all tribes of all Brazil. Guarani you can learn and still being used in full-time service in Paraguay. So Guarani is a language. In fact, you can have Google Translate, you can find the Guarani language. But for whatever reason, at that particular time and point, my mother never, when I asked my mother about joining the religious order, my mother never looked up to me, but just said, women can join the orders, but not men. So I never argued with my mother. I stopped. But in between that time, Song and I have shared much of our discussion. He went on, continued to become a priest, eventually a bishop. So Song, if you can Google in Wikipedia, Song, Bishop of Indians, or Bispo dos Índios. In the history of Brazil, Song went on to get his priesthood, eventually bishop. He went to Vatican, and like me, he speaks between 5 and 6 languages fluently. And that particular time, we talk about the Tupi Guarani in 1965. When I called him, he said, "You're welcome to come, Paul. Knowing your interest, you will find it very interesting. We have a common language, língua geral in Portuguese. It's called Ninhgatu, N-H-E-E-G-A-H-T-U. Well, anyway, you can Google that also. And I became very interested because there were 102 different tribes in that region, in the upper Rio Negro, in São Gabriel de Cachoeira. But another reason I went to San Gabriel is because after we have shared and talked, one of our common friend, a priest from São Paulo, had told me, "Sir Paul, I'm glad you're going up to see Don Songi. And I just want you to know, we just got news that Don Songi just discovered he had Parkinson's. And it's not good." Well, it shocked me a little bit, but I do know I gone up with this particular mindset because 2008 I turned 60, and most of my life, my wife and I have never abandoned my interest in learning, my care for education, very much so when I developed the 3C system, and I was always eager to bring it back where I can see a psychological counseling system that can have a universal application. Well, maybe that's part of being Catholic. Okay, I'm no longer a church-going Catholic, but my exposure with the religious group, with the Salesians, with the engagement to the Brazilian wilderness and the multiple culture, not necessarily in the European setting, but the curiosity about the indigenous people and the many unwritten languages, habits, and well, I guess curiosity has always been that part of the motivation. But at any rate, in 2008 is also when I turned 60. I have decided to take 6 weeks off, asking my partner's permission to head south from here, but north of São Paulo, and I stayed the 6 weeks. It was an absolutely amazing turning point, educational point, education about life, about the indigenous in the village I visited, the story we share, and their practice and worship. It just so happened in that particular time and point, we're celebrating a festival, Sing An. Well, I end up helping and servicing Mass with Bishop Song. At that particular time and point, it's not easy. He's the only bishop. There were 8 priests or more in the area. Well, each priest have their own villages and their communities, and then we have the school of nuns. And when the celebrity of visiting nuns from Spain, from Italy, along they're bringing goodies, bringing provisions and medicine, to the natives, and also many donations. As a matter of fact, the church was not financially well operated. The parish of San Gabriel were being sustained by two of the parishes from Germany. But at any rate, that particular timing point is that I wanted so much to share with Song. And in that 6 weeks, during the weekend, the celebrating of the St. Anne's celebration, I end up in the high mass sitting along with the priest, plus the three former bishops, three of them in the service, the other been sitting on the side, plus the entire community of all the regions of villages coming in down up and down the river to share this celebration. In the midst of this service, after the mass, and we have a little bit of a briefing to speak to the 120 plus catechists. These are the native indigenous people from tribes, I just name a few, Tucanos and the Pare and Baniva, and plus the Yanomami. They're further up, they're not so close to us. And in that particular time and point, we're sitting on the audience, and the direction of the catechism was directed by a nun named Philomena. And by the opening of Philomena's speech, she opened up the documentation, and very openly speaking, they have received words from the Vatican. And to celebrate this weekend's activities, celebrating St. Anne, I only find then Anne was Mary's mother. And my school, San Joaquin, is Anne's husband. Anyway, that's that kind of Catholic I've become. But anyway, in the 6 weeks sharing that was coming to almost the last week of my stay, Sister Philomena, after presenting, have said the Vatican sending a mandate to all Brazil and all the parishes to advocate these two terms about the natives and how to handle the situation about the engagement to the learning and culture. The two terms was spoken in Portuguese is called enculturação, E-N, meaning enculturation, E-N. And the other one is inculturação, with I-N. It's enculturation. The first one meaning to learn. The second one is to learn from your past. She did not elaborate of the terminologies. Apparently, this is a new terminology for all of the parish and the people in the parish. At that particular time and moment, Sister Philomena looked at me and looked at the audience to say that we are very fortunate to have Dr. Paulo Yi amongst us. And I hope and I think from his experience being a layman, now almost labeling that I'm not religious, that he will give us some insights to guide us through the understanding of these two words, enculturação and inculturação. It hit me like a baseball bat. I said, wait a minute, I have zero preparation, and to speak of these two terms, yes, I have a great deal of exposure about culture, about learning, about cultural anthropology. As a matter of fact, the 6 weeks in that region, that's exactly what's happening. I'm learning a great deal from the people and from the culture and from the clergy. In that particular time and moment, she asked me to come up. I did. And when at that presentation, I'm looking at my left side with the three bishops sitting comfortably, and I just nodded, greeting them that I'm going to speak. And I was still mumbling and just trying very hard, what do I speak? I guess necessity is really the invention. Immediately, I spoke and I said, okay, to my audience, 200 plus people with 120 catechists. These are the people to give religious indoctrination training to their communities. And I just spoke very quietly. I said, dear friends, I'm here now almost a month. My time here is all about enculturação. I'm here to learn. I have never been to this region of Rio Negro. I do not know the many group of your indigenous people and your language and your custom and your habit and your diet. I have learned a great deal. Enculturation is all about learning about cultures. What is the culture? What are the similarities between Baniva and Tucano and the Bare that I know, and also the Yanomami? What is your diet? What is your practice? Enculturação is everyday learning culture. Like me coming back to the church, working with my dear friend, Bishop Song. Where are we now? What directions our church is going to? How are we relating to the community? How are we handling the trouble we face with finances? It's all about learning. The second word, enculturação, thank God and thank my education in Brazil, is basically telling me to reflect upon myself how we can learn from our own culture, meaning you. For those of you in the community who now we're speaking Portuguese to the audience, we're sharing a common language here. But I do understand you have a lingua called Ninkatu. I just presented this a month ago by Bishop Song. I'm here. I'm curious. And also, this is about learning about your culture. Also, it's a reflective thinking and about us. Have we in the church neglected or denied any of the richness of your culture, not being able to share? This is the time. In this particular time and moment, there's a very, very interesting man. Is a military sergeant in full uniform, but he's also one of the catechists, a leading man with the parish, engaging in the overall education with the indigenous. And he stood up almost in a military salute and put in a very formal speaking of Portuguese. And he said, yes, dear Dr. Paul. And I almost trying to correct him, but in the way people address you in Brazil, in some of the region, they call you doutor. Does not mean you're a doctor, but it's just a way to put you in a rank and file, in a upper echelon or upper ranking. And the way he had spoken to me, and so eloquently, and meaning he said, please tell us more about enculturation. At that particular time and moment, I said, I also was not well prepared as you, any of you, by this request from the Vatican. However, I'll give you the best I can. And it was a very disputed region between the Catholic Church, not the church, it's not fighting, but there's the NGOs. Those are you can see, find Canadians, Americans, you can find Europeans. They have a separate camp. They have a different center. And in general, they were attacking the traditional church and the traditional value of the church. And because the location, because their investment, they have a better system of the software, the computer. And I was trying to take my computer and my phone to have a better access. So in that particular morning, I went over. And they were not friendly. Arms were crossing. Usually the Brazilians, we hug, we shook hands, we tap in the shoulder, almost like a soft abraço. And very, very much always an endearment. I learned all that for my Brazil that I love dearly. But they were very cool, very cold to me. But they let me use the space, and I went on to do my research. that morning. But eventually I just walk up to one of them. I said, I don't know. Are you people not in the good terms with the parish? And they look at me almost in a very distant way. I said, well, you know the differences. I said, no, I don't. I really don't know. Let me know. But I said, I don't feel any hostility or any. But at the end, they have softened up, and also cynically but educationally asking me, do you know my name? I said, no, but tell me. Well, the name, I cannot remember all, but I think this is very important. It's almost like Akirabia, and the first name also not the traditional Christian names. So I understand he told me about his tribe and what his name means. Basically, a little bit like our Native Americans, Red Cloud. Maybe he was one of the Comanches, or one of the Blackfoot here in the Midwest, or Jiwei. But anyway, it's relating to an animal and to sky and space, or wood or water. That I could understand. So when this sergeant, with a very firm, very military gesture, asking me to inspire them or help them to understand enculturation, I just pick up the list from the church, from the 120 names, and I just read it out. I said, Sergeant, your name is Antonio Oliveira. I read down the name Souza, and put English Souza. The other name, Albuquerque. One by one, Picudo, Gorgulho. All the names are Luso-Brazilian, a Portuguese Brazilian. Okay. Then I told them, I went over to the camp, the NGO, and I have learned about their names. And these names relating very close to the North American, Native American names that I can relate to. Okay, be that Red Cloud, or be the Yellow Eagle. And when I finished with those names, and now I said, may I have a blackboard? They have a chalkboard. I saw that in the corner they brought in. And I asked for the chalk, and I start writing on the wall. So my name is Paul, and you know me as Paulo, Y-I-H. That's how it's said in Portuguese, Y-I-H. In Cantonese, or in Chinese, my last name means foliage, leaf, maple leaves. And my name, Paul, is Christian name given from baptismal. But I have my Chinese name, Y-U-F-U-N-G, Yu Feng. Immediately after that, I look up to Bishop Song, because I read from the Wikipedia. Bishop Song's name is On, and in Chinese, complete. I have written out his name. I cannot remember now to write it down. I said, Bishop Song and we're both Roman Catholics, but we both have retained our Chinese names. They may not in use every day, but in my passport is the English sound of my name is written completely. It's my legal name. So directly and indirectly, we have become westernized, but we have not relinquished our Chinese heritage. I mean, by choice or not, by accident or not, I think what the church is trying to indicate is trying to tell our people here in Brazil, enculturação or enculturation is to reflect upon your life. I wonder if your parents or grandparents, like those natives I met in the NGO office, do they have a Portuguese name like yours? Or can they tell you they have a separate name that representing the entire tribe? And that is the dialogue I have started in almost a little bit of a panic, not certain what to tell the audience to identify the two words of enculturation, E-N, and inculturation. I have since then, from that time, by adding the third and the fourth about culturation, I have added deculturation, destroying cultures, racism. Acculturation is another form of a little bit of the alienating others, their cultures. Such in the presence, we know there are other ethnic people in and among us, but their culture is not being honored or aware of. And I have since discovered I'm not the originator of the term I use called deculturation. Only after I have read several books written by Darcy Ribeiro, another wonderful, my Brazilian author, cultural anthropologist, his movie, his films, his footage, extremely influential to the stature I have today. Another one, the Brazilian that inspired me all my life, is Paulo Freire. In fact, my platform on Facebook, talk about conscientization, is a full honor of Paulo Freire. Because of him, he inspired me to connect my idea about conscience back to my home village philosopher, famous philosopher in China, Wang Yangming from Yuyao, and also directly linked back to the several disciplines of Tao, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and also Buddha. As you have noticed, I did not phrase those terms into isms, because oftentimes in the linguistic pattern can hold you back to your thinking about isms like religion. Confucius' studies were never religious. Neither was Lao Tzu's Tao, just a way. And Buddha, telling us all we have the Buddha in all of us. One of the huge mistakes in languages, in linguistics, is where when you put ism, it becomes a religion, like Catholicism. It's like all these languages sometimes had not intentionally but direct you to associating the many disciplines, value systems to become religion. A language, that's why I enjoy my learning daily. Sometimes a language can be so horrible that we know it's wrong. We know the language and its use have done wrong to the people. But oftentimes we have forgot to show the connotation and its ugly meaning, what that word means. For example, that's why I enjoy languages. We have the English language, the word sinister. Somebody horrible. Well, that came from the Latin Italian linguistic group. When they talk about left, it's sinistra. Destra is right. Dritta is forward. In the time of the Inquisition, in the Middle Ages, the lefties were called the devil's child. Anyone who's using the left hand were put to the bonfire. Imagine that, the horrors of a human's ignorance. No, I'm not putting fault to anybody, but culturally we carry on certain languages. The person is sinister because he's left-handed. So he stayed on. And the language of decimated come from the Roman language. In Spanish, Portuguese, diez. Well, the Roman orders, every 10, there is an order and system to organize the troops. Decimations also one time the execution to kill in between every one of the prisoners. So decimation. What I'm trying to tell you that in that particular time, in that particular moment, when I learned of the words enculturation and inculturation, had given birth of my creation of deculturation. Even though I thought I was one of the first creator of the term, but it was already being used by someone like Darcy Ribeiro. I hope if you will get a chance to read his book, Povo Brasileiro, the Brazilian people. I learned so much from this man. He and Paulo Freire shared their time, their moment, and he even said, "We're lucky in Brazil. We don't have a dead cultural anthropology. Our cultural anthropology is alive, is vivo." And that's how much I have received from the people and from Brazil. And with this core exposure from the Brazilian cultures and its people, it had enriched now of my procurement, my development from the 3 C's now into the psychology of the round and square. And I just want to put this in this structuring of my background, preparing myself to the psychology round and square and the figures of the Monkey King. And I will stop here to keep my speak relatively short, but by your comment, by your response, by your request, and I will continue doing the series of this kind of talk, be that about Brazil, be that about the Monkey King, and be that with all the components and bits and pieces of culture that hopefully by the end of June, by July, I will be able to starting a little bit more formal, more structured, more organized on the specific groups of the topic as the psychology round and square. But beyond round and square, that will be the 3 civilizations that we can shape and form. The first one, again, I created the term, kinesiological civilization. The second one is already happening in China in the last 20 years. It's called the ecological civilization. By the Chinese electric vehicle, by their following the mandate to creating a world with less carbon emission, and in knowing that 1.4 billion Chinese coming into the modernity and the vehicles and cars, based on my observation, they have already achieved quite a bit of this ecological civilization building and turning desert into green, into cultivatable land and whatnot. And the third one is called instead of ecological, it's called economical civilization. Economical civilization, by my count, is to stop the exploitation of the practice of usury and to stop the practice of the predatory lending, and by the formation, the up and coming system of BRICS, or the Global South, or the Chinese one Belt, One Road, it can all be looked upon by the West with hostility. But with the threats of the nuclear annihilation of all of us, I found that in my study of the 3 C's, there's the psychology round and square, I continue to have a focus is to hope that we can have in our lifetime, we can create the 3 civilization clusters that can endure, that will be lasting. Because the last 3 major global civilizations were all destroyed by bullies. Egypt, gone. Mesopotamia, gone. The Indus Valley, gone. For whatever reason, disaster, flood, war, intruders, invaders. And based on my observation, not solid, but in my hypothesis, all those 3 regions in flat water area, river valley area, they had no defense. They all have fallen to the people, invaders, Just like China, we have always fought against the people in the north. But if we can look beyond the fights, you look in the climatic zone, every time there is a disaster, a cold winter, there's no food for the nomads horses of people, they will invade south. That's why the Great Wall was created, not just by Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, by the other kings and dynasties. And more importantly, maybe a little bit ethnic-centrically speaking about the Chinese civilization had endured and lasted over 5,000 years, but with 3,000 years written language since the oracle bones in the Shang dynasty, which are about 3,300 from today, is because China had a unique landscape. We have the Gobi Desert in the west, northwest, blockades a lot of the other tribal, and the north, China have only invaders coming up from the northern region. That's why the Great Wall. But we are blocked also by the mountain between India and south, by the Himalayas, and the east is the ocean. And luckily, the two Chinese rivers flowing from northwest to east, the Yellow River and the River Yangtze. And because the mountains, because the desert, because the ocean, the two cultural zones of China managed not to be captured, destroyed, or devastated, unlike Mesopotamia, Euphrates, Tigris, unlike the Nile River, and like the Indus Valley. And that's how, based on my observation, and sometimes it's luck of the draw, sometimes the terrain, and sometimes it's the culture that we have been able to keep our cluster of cultures. One has to have time to take silk of the worm and to weave into fabrics, to give comfort, to give warmth. For me, cultures are important. It was just as important when I engaged the Brazilian natives in all regions. I'm still helping some of them develop economic opportunities with China. In the middle of the Amazons, in between the Yanomamis and the people from the Cintas Largas, deep in the jungles, there are many savanna that have low-growing plants. They're totally open for the farming or the system farming, like the Chinese. They don't have an economic culture. That culture had to be cultivated. That's why economic culture, economical civilization have to be cultivated in such a way that they will not be exploited by the many past wrongful practice of economy only suitable to a specific tribe or a specific group. And I hope I will end it here because I will have other topic to speak of. But in this segment, I hope we can have more exchange. I'm basically preparing the bigger issue when I speak of the psychology of round and square. And I want this psychology to be into every tribe, into every cultural zone, including the shanty towns, the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, or the poor area in all regions around the world. Because the psychology using shaped round, square, and half the square is a triangle, which looks like an arrow, looks like a instrument of persecution. But nevertheless, I hope not too far away, not too long, I will be able to make all those presentations in a very sequential way and to the benefit of all. Feel free to contact me, email, phone. I will list in the back of my presentation here. Have a good day. So long.